Welcome to lab session 1 of the Introduction to Development of the Central Nervous System, the Telencephalon and the Meninges. First of all, let's cover some basics. Most importantly, things you might learn or have already learned during histology classes. But simply, the nervous system is made out of the glia neuron cells, which are responsible for reception, transmission and processing of stimuli, and also trigger certain cell activities and the release of neurotransmitters. We have these cell bodies, which is the perikaryon, where we can see the bodies, which are basically the rough endoplasmatic reticulum, and as well as a basophilic granular area. Then there are the processes made out of the dendrites, which have a process known as the arborization, which makes it possible that one neuron receives the axon terminals from other nerve cells. Then there is the CNS in the gray matter, made of nuclei and cortex, and the difference here with the PNS in the ganglia, and somatic ganglia, autonomic ganglia, which is composed of the sympathetic and parasympathetic ganglia. Then there's the white matter, made of the neural processes, but without any neuronal cell bodies. Then the classification of neurons. There's the unipolar neuron, which only has a single process, comes out of the cell body, an axon. Then there's the bipolar neurons, which have two processes, one axon and one dendrite. Commonly, they are featured in retina of the eye. There's also the pseudo-unipolar neurons that have a single process, come out of the cell body, and divide into two branches. One branch, the dendrite, extends to a peripheral nerve ending, and the other, the axon, extends to a central nervous system. And then the multipolar projected neuron with one axon, many dendrites, which is also the most common type. Then here, basics, the sensory, as known as the afferent neurons, which transmit the afferent impulses to the CNS from sensory information from example skin, viscera, muscles. Then the motor afferent neurons, which is vice versa, the afferent information from CNS to the skeletal system of peripheral organs. The astrocytes, they basically proliferate to make the scar issue in case CNS is damaged. You got to differentiate the protoplasmic, which is the gray matter, and the fibrous white matter. Now we finally come to the actual anatomy stuff. There's the CNS, or the somatic nuclei cortex, or pallium, and the PNS, which is somatic nerves, cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and both of them have the autonomic nerves, made of sympathetic and parasympathetic. In case of CNS, it's sympathetic and parasympathetic nuclei. In case of PNS, it's always about the nerves. We gotta differentiate the somatic system, made of CNS impulses between one neuron to skeletal muscles, and the autonomic system, one neuron, impulses from CNS to autonomic ganglia, second neuron to peripheral organ. Then the ontogenic divisions. The brain consists of these primary divisions, the prosencephalon, which is the forebrain, telencephalon, endbrain, the encephalon, thalamus, epithalamus, hypothalamus, subthalamus, metathalamus. And during embryological development, the two parts, the telencephalon and the menincephalon, are subdivided, and there are 5 transverse segments, as we see here in the figure. The prosencephalon is made of the telencephalon, which consists of 2 hemispheres, left and right cerebral hemispheres. The encephalon has 5 parts. The mesencephalon is not divided and remains the midbrain. The rhomencephalon is the hindbrain and includes metencephalon, pons, cerebellum, mesencephalon, medulla oblongata, and bulb. Then we have here the brainstem, medulla oblongata, pons, mesencephalon. And now the further genetic divisions with the paleocortex, Latin for the old cortex, and it is the transitional cortex between the archicortex and the neocortex. It has between 4 to 5 layers. Neurons have a nucleate reticulate pattern and remains as part of the rhinencephalon in the olfactory region around the vallecula of the basal forebrain. Then we have the archicortex, which is between the paleo and neocortex. It's 3 layers and occurs in hippocampal formation. Both of these structures create the allocortex. Then the neocortex consists of mesocortex and ectocortex. The mesocortex covers the limbic lobe, and the ectocortex covers most of the cerebral surface. Now we come to the dura mater, which is the outermost meningeal layer, which also has 2 more layers. The outer is the endosteal and the inner is the meningeal, and these are in between the venous sinuses. Then we have the arachnoids in between, and it is divided in the cerebral and spinal arachnoid mater. Then there is the pia mater, which is the innermost meningeal layer, and it includes the falx cerebri and cerebelli in the median plane. The dura mater is innervated by CN5, CN10, and CN13. The meningeal branch of axillary to anterior cranial fossa. The meningeal branches of the mandibular nerve, which supplies the middle cranial fossa, and the meningeal branch of the ophthalmic nerve, which supplies the tentorium cerebelli. Then the meningeal branch hypoglossal, which supplies the posterior cranial fossa. There are all these dura folds. First of all, the falx cerebri. Here the straight sinus runs to the tentorium cerebelli. Following attachments, crista galli, internal protuberance, straight sinus. Falx cerebelli is below the tentorium cerebelli, has the attachment internal protuberance in terms of the crest, foramen magnum. Then there's the tentorium cerebelli. Between them is the upper cerebellum and the lower occipital lobe. The attachments internal protuberance, superior petrous part of temporal bone, the ecleal process middle sagittal axis, made out of straight sinus, posterior margin with the transverse sinus, anterior margin with the torri and caesura. Then there are inferior groups of sinuses which join these cavernous sinuses. The sphenoparietal sinus follows along the posterior part of the lesser wing of sphenoid and communicates with the ophthalmic veins to contact the cavernous sinus. The cavernous sinus communicates with the pterygoid plexus as it is located on each side of the body of the sphenoid bone, and does so via venous plexus, via foramen ovale and the internal carotid venous plexus. It contains the internal carotid artery CN3, 4, 5.1, 5.2, 6. Drains the superior ophthalmic vein, the superior orbital fissure, central retinal vein, sphenoparietal sinus, middle cerebral vein, efferent vein, superior petrosal sinus to sigmoid sinus, and the inferior petrosal sinus. The anterior and posterior cover intercavernous sinuses. This is superior petrosal, which goes into the cavernous sinus, to the transverse sinus, and the inferior petrosal, cavernous sinus, and the internal jugular vein. Then we come to the cerebral hemispheres. We got the Telencephalon, the main man himself, made of the two cerebral hemispheres separated by a longitudinal fissure. And there's the transverse cerebral fissure, which is located underneath the corpus callosum and splenium, above the root of the third ventricle, and passes along the choroid artery in the great cerebral vein. Its superior lateral surface includes the central sulcus, which is between frontal parietal lobes. The lateral sulcus has the posterior ramus between frontal and temporal lobes. Anterior ascending ramus on frontal lobe. Parieto-occipital sulcus, preoccipital notch, and the occipital transverse line. The medial and inferior surface has the corpus callosum sulcus, cingulate sulcus, marginal branch, parieto-occipital sulcus, central sulcus, and collateral sulcus. There's the frontal lobe of the superior lateral surface. Obviously, it's the largest lobe, and so it includes the precentral sulcus, superior frontal sulcus, inferior frontal sulcus, precentral gyrus, superior frontal gyrus, middle frontal gyrus, inferior frontal gyrus, which is divided into an ascending and anterior rami of the lateral sulcus, which are grouped around two rami for the speech area of bronchi, the orbital, triangular, and orbicular part. There's the medial and inferior surface, which inhabit the medial frontal gyrus, paracentral sulcus, paracentral lobule, with the anterior paracentral gyrus, central sulcus, subcallosal area, with the paraterminal gyrus, parothory area, with its gyri and sulci, the orbital gyri, orbital sulci, which is A-shaped, then the straight gyrus, olfactory sulcus, lateral olfactory gyrus, medial olfactory gyrus. The parietal lobe has this in its superior lateral surface, postcentral sulcus, intraparietal sulcus, marginal part of parieto-occipital sulcus, distal part of lateral sulcus, distal part of the superior temporal sulcus, superior parietal lobule, inferior parietal lobule, supramarginal gyrus, angular gyrus. Its marginal surface, it has the parieto-occipital sulcus, subparietal sulcus, distal part of cingulate sulcus, and the precuneus, the postcentral part of paracentral lobule, with its posterior paracentral gyrus. The occipital lobe has in its superior lateral surface transoccipital sulcus, lunate sulcus, behind it its gyrus scandens, lateral occipital sulcus, short and horizontal, divided into the superior lateral surface, superior orbital gyrus, superior occipital gyrus, inferior occipital gyrus, medial inferior surface with the cuneus, green sulcus, Y-shaped, occipital temporal sulcus, parieto-occipital sulcus. This is the part of lingual gyrus, this is the part of lateral occipital temporal gyrus, and medial occipital temporal gyrus. Its temporal lobe defined in its superior lateral surface, superior temporal sulcus, inferior temporal sulcus, superior temporal gyrus, mid-temporal, inferior temporal gyrus, transverse temporal sulcus, separated into anterior transverse and posterior transverse, then the inferior surface with its occipital temporal sulcus, collateral sulcus, separated into above with the lingual gyrus, medial occipital temporal gyrus, lateral occipital temporal gyrus. Then there's the insula. It is pyramidal shaped area of the pallium, and it is an hidden accessory lobe within the lateral sulcus. Its coverings are called the opercula. So we got three operculi: the frontal operculum, parietal operculum, and temporal operculum. It is surrounded by circular sulcus, and the medial top of insula we call the Lehman insula. The cortex insula is also separated into central sulcus. The anterior part has the short gyri and the posterior part is the long gyri. Here we see the progression of the central nervous system, how it developed from primary divisions, the prosencephalon forebrain, into secondary divisions, telencephalon endbrain, telencephalon medium, into white matter, anterior commissure, corpus callosum, fornix, septum pellucidum, the cerebral hemispheres into grey matter, cortex, renencephalon, basal ganglia, with the lateral ventricle. Then from the forebrain we also got the diencephalon, the interbrain, Telencephalon, thalamus, epithalamus, metathalamus, thalamic white and grey matter, habenula trigone, pineal gland, habenula commissure, commissure posterior, medial nut, geniculate body. Then the hypothalamus, infundibulum, pituitary gland, tuberous cinereal, mammillary bodies with its third ventricle. The mesencephalon midbrain remains with the mesencephalic tectum, cerebropeduncles. Lamina tectis appear inferior colliculi, codigemina brachia, tegmentum crustextrum est sinistrum, with the mesencephalic aqueduct. Rhomencephalon, the hindbrain with the metencephalon, which developed into the isthmus metencephaly with its Lemnisci trigone, superior medullary velum, superior cerebral peduncles, the pons, middle cerebral peduncles, basilar part of pons, tegmentum of pons, cerebellum, vermis, cerebellar hemisphere, cerebellar nuclei. Also the medulla oblongata, known as menincephalon, into the inferior cerebral peduncle, the medulla oblongata, lamina tectoria of fourth ventricle. Now let's talk about cerebral dominance and lateralization. Of course, each central hemisphere has a different specification. Functions perforated, with individuals preferring one hemisphere for certain tasks, and certain tasks being performed there. Generally, predominantly, the left hemisphere is more dominant to 98% of individuals. Of course, it can vary, but we see here in the brain lateralization that left hemisphere is more predominant in writing, for example, task throwing a ball, calculating, analytical thinking, motor function. Of the right part of the body is unilateral, which we call cerebral lateralization. Now here we have the picture of the homunculus, motor homunculus. It's the primary secondary cortical area, with the frontal cortical area, with the functions being for motor, speech, cognition, the higher levels of behavior, and is made of the precentral gyrus, the primary motor area, with the parts orbicularis and triangularis of the inferior frontal gyrus, also known as the Broca's area, which coordinates muscles important for speech. Other parts of the body are mapped in corresponding areas on the surface of the frontal cerebral cortex, precentral gyrus, which produce this image of this homunculus. Lesions of the precentral gyrus may create impairment of the speech muscles and contralateral spastic motor neuron paralysis. About the parietal cortical area, its functions are the somatosensory processing. It is based within the postcentral gyrus, responsible for primary sensory area. The supramarginal gyrus is responsible for touch. Its lesions, for example, give tactile agnosia. The angular gyrus of the inferior parietal lobe is responsible for writing and visual objects and its comprehension. The supramarginal gyrus and angular gyrus we call the sensory speech area, also known as the Meninges area. Functions of the parietal lobe are somatosensory processing. the occipital cortical area, located within Cochrane sulcus, responsible for primary visual area, surrounded by concentric bands, forms visual association areas. Its function is of course the visualization, and the lesion we may call alexia or visual agnosia. Then there is the temporal cortical area, with a transverse gyrus of Herschel. It's the primary auditory area, lies in its posterior end of superior temporal gyrus on the temporal surface of lateral sulcus, the sensory speech area, or Meninges area, within the supramarginal angular gyri. Its lesion gives the sensory aphasia, the auditory association area, and it's responsible for memory and audition. The insular lobe is just there for taste, and the limbic lobe controls primitive emotions, behavior, activity, and olfactory. Then here we got examples of the Broca's aphasia. It's a lesion within the left inferior prefrontal cortex, which causes disrupted speech, and is, as we see, the patient has a certain comprehension, but it lacks in the impairment of actual speech. Meanwhile, the Wernicke's aphasia is the reverse issue, as there is a lesion to the left temporal cortex, and the speech is fluent, but the information has no value. The comprehension is impaired. Then let's talk about the lateral ventricle. It's separated by a septum pellucidum. There's a typo, I'm sorry. It is made of the central part, which is located within the parietal lobe. It is above the thalamus and beneath corpus callosum. Its roof is formed by the inferior corpus callosum, the floor of the inferior wall of the body of caudate nucleus. Stria terminalis, choroid plexus, and the tinea choroidea. The interventricular foramen to splenium of corpus callosum. Then there's the frontal horn, the anterior part of lateral ventricle. It is continuous with the interventricular foramen. Its roof is formed by the inferior surface of the corpus callosum, medial wall by the septum pellucidum, lateral wall is modeled by the head of the caudate nucleus. The occipital horn, posteriorly, has a roof made out of the fibers of the tapetum and radiation of corpus callosum. The floor of collateral triangle and eminence, lateral wall formed by fibers of the tapetum, and the medial wall carved by the calca avis and calca spur. As well as, very important, the bulb of the occipital horn. Then there's the temporal horn, inferior part. It is made up of an inferior medial wall, the collateral eminence, pes hippocampus, fimbria of the hippocampus, bundle of white fibers emanating from alveolus and continues as the crus of the fornix, the choroid plexus of lateral ventricle, extending from the interventricular foramen from the central part to the inferior horn and the alveolus of the hippocampus. Its superior lateral wall is formed by the tapetum, explaining it is the temporal fibers of the corpus callosum, two of the caudate nucleus, stria terminalis, radiation of corpus callosum, and the amygdaloid body. We'll come to this in the next lessons, and I just wish you to continue studying and have a nice evening, night, morning, whatever time you're watching.